Hello and welcome to Broadcast Astrology. I've been looking forward to recording this episode because Lisa and I put out a call to the universe to submit. Anybody could submit questions. And we got a lot of interesting replies, and we're going to dive into some chart questions today. Today, we're going to be focusing on Marcos, who has some questions about what his natal chart says regarding career. He also has some questions about his brother. He had some challenging circumstances earlier in the year, so we're going to take a look at transits to his sibling in his chart and share with him a little bit about what we can see there. And he also had some questions about relocation and whether this was a good time for relocation. So we've got lots of great charts to pull. We'll start with the natal chart and dive in.
Yeah, thank you, Marcos. Thank you for sharing your amazing questions. And clearly, you have an understanding of astrology because you know that your sibling who rules the third house, here, let me put the chart up, is this Venus in your 12th house. So clearly, you know what you're talking about. And it's always exciting to get fellow astrologers asking questions as well and involved. So thank you. As you can see, as Sarah mentioned, the first two are around career, which is ruled by this Venus, as well as the third house, the brother, which is also ruled by this Venus. So yeah, there's a lot to say about this.
Some of the things I look for when evaluating career is we look at the 10th house, obviously, of career, the ruler of the 10th. I like to look at the tightest aspects in the natal chart just to say something about their nature, their personality, their constitution, and what might be a good fit for them work-wise. We also look at anything that ends up in the nodal bending because the lunar nodes indicate our intimate connections. So this is saying something about how we work with people, the people we encounter, the people we end up in connection with. We also look at Mars-Jupiter as a planetary combination because this is one of the stellar combinations for work in the chart. Is there anything I'm missing, Lisa?
No, I think you covered it pretty well.
So that was everything. We just went through, extracted all the data. And when I was looking at it, Lisa, the first thing that came to my mind was I just wanted to validate for Marcos. I think he is definitely living into his astrology right now. I think there's a very valid reason that he has these questions. There are a lot of different things in terms of career that I think might indicate that this is something for which it's going to take Marcos a little bit of time to sort out. We see that L10 is in the 12th house. And so there are aspects of his career that might be a little bit behind the scenes or not readily apparent to him. Initially, there could be some confusion about it. And this also indicates doing work of some kind with populations that are, you could say, marginalized populations. This is definitely a house of service work and maybe showing up for the underdog. And when I went a little deeper with this, it made me, when you look at the relationship story in Marcos's chart, there's a lot that shows up with men in his life and wounding around men. This could have originated in the early family story. And he's already shared with us that there's a contentious relationship with a brother. So there are a lot of things in all of that data that to me seem to speak to him doing some kind of work with men as a means of repairing some of the wounding in his own life, some of that story that he's lived into. And relationships in general look like something that he's trying to sort out in this life.
Yes. One thing that Sarah and I were speaking to as well is that there's dichotomy, which is so natural in human life, as well as expressed through astrology as well. Marcos, you're somebody who likes to work independently and likes to do things on your own terms and have autonomy within what you're doing. And also within that work, have control over how the finances play out and have autonomy within your financial circumstances. That said, it looks like there could also be a lot of, I guess one place that we didn't touch on that I'd like to look at for career is the second house, just because it is money, but it's also the talents that you bring towards your career and how much you feel like you're worth with things in your toolbox you feel like are worthy of bringing forward into the world and how much you sense that you're worthy of getting paid for it. One of the indicators that we looked at for you needing to work on your own is that L2 is this Mercury in the first house. So you have a very close connection to those finances, which is really great. However, there's a couple different indicators here that show that maybe part of this journey for you is finding the worth in your gifts that you have to bring forward into the world. And maybe you're too hard on yourself. And addressing that, you're not using this Mercury Saturn against yourself. You can be very hard on yourself. You're someone who can sometimes sense that your cup is half full, but understanding that's the lens that we're given when we have a hard Mercury Saturn aspect like you have. And working with that hand in hand would be part of. And I have so many questions. I wish you were here to talk to us about them.
Maybe we could do
Going
a post, a follow up with
Yeah,
Marcos, because
exactly.
that sun is also opposing Saturn. And I do
Yeah,
think, just as a Leo rising individual, there's something about his story karmically that is saying something about his need to be seen and express himself. And yet we see a lot of challenges to that in the chart where that might not be easy. And again, without him here, I don't want to go deep into the family story, but both of the parental figures look like maybe they couldn't show up as the most supportive, emotionally available resource for Marcos. And so I do think that empowered in his career is part of how he's going to heal and tend to this.
absolutely. Yeah.
And we see the ruler of the 10th, which indicates career, Venus, is also opposing this Uranus Neptune, which this is a generational planetary signature. So it applies to a lot of people your age, Marcos. And it really says something about the social drive, the kind of idealism and interest in the occult and the mystical and mediumship, and how this can be pushed out into the world in a way that's of service to people. And like you said, Lisa, we think Marcos probably he has some astrology experience. I don't know if that's a piece of what you do. But I think also that Uranus does demand some level of risk on your part, Marcos. And I think that might be someplace where you feel some tension in your life because, as Lisa pointed out, that Saturn can make us feel somewhat inhibited in fully expressing things. And then you have Chiron, the wounded healer, in the mix, speaking to how the men have showed up in your life and your own sense of vitality and how your identity and how you're showing up. So there is like a theme there, I think, of some kind of healing work with men, certainly potential for creative work, something innovative or revolutionary. I have a feeling it's not going to look like everybody else's job. And I do think, because that Uranus Neptune is conjuncting the planet or squaring the planetary signature for work, that this is a piece that is really worth figuring out for you, Marcos. It is a big piece of your identity. And it's a piece with South Node in the 10th. We know it's a piece that's not necessarily going to come easily. There's might be a little pothole. It might take a little bit more time. And I think, Lisa, we looked at the transits too that really speak to this being a time to be asking these questions about the
Yeah,
work that you want to do.
absolutely. Yeah. Let me see. And there's so much about the work. And like Sarah said, there's this theme of visibility that comes up in your chart with being a Leo rising and having the sun, which with conjunct Chiron, opposite Saturn, all these things saying maybe you shouldn't shine, maybe you should just damper it down. But I think that's when we're given that path and that theme, that core element to our chart and to our life mission, that's actually the thing that we're supposed to be working through. And I wonder, when I look at your chart, if you have psychic abilities, if you're very creative, if you are able to really be with people in challenging spaces, like in therapy or something like that, one on one, like really holding solid space for other people. And it looks like you're someone who has this talent to and show up for people in spaces that are challenging for them, where they feel pain, where they are experiencing some level of trauma. And it looks like you're somebody who's not only just able to hold the space in a way that feels safe and where people can be vulnerable, but also that you can truly meet them compassionately and be in that space with them in a really powerful way. And it also looks like, as part of that, of course, boundaries are an issue, but it does look like you have natural abilities to hold your own boundaries, which I think is part of the talent in these vulnerable spaces as well.
Yeah. Another consideration I had when I was looking at the career is just he might need a muggle job to sustain
Yeah.
himself while he works towards something that's really in alignment with his identity. And
Yes.
so if you're feeling some of that, Marcos, where you're like, oh, I have this hobby or I have something I'm really passionate about, but I'm not able to make it just yet, I would say take the risk because the chart is asking for you to take some risk in order to move towards the ideal, to move towards your vision for your own work. And also, you do have part of fortune in the 10th house. And I think ultimately, you're going to figure this out in a way that brings you a lot of joy and certainly could be profitable down the line. But I wouldn't start there. I wouldn't start with the money story because, that Mercury is the ruler of the second house, it is our finances. So, opposing Saturn, it might just take some time to build up in a way and that is really sustainable for you.
Yeah, and there's a whole bunch of indicate what Sarah's saying too is that patience and perseverance, slowly putting one step in front of the other. And there's a bunch of things that suggest in this chart as well that this could be the long road vision, and building it up slowly might be part of what you have to do. And yes, taking the 9 to 5, the muggle work might be necessary as you slowly and ploddingly create the career that you want, the legacy in the world that you want to put forward. It looks like it's more of a long game instead of a quick fix.
And if we look at transits, I feel like there's a strong piece right now that's just asking you to connect with the people. You're going to have Jupiter conjunct that Venus exact this year. You also have your progressed moon that just went into the sign of Libra. So, networking, having conversations with people about what it is you want to do. I feel like there's the possibility for opportunities showing up through people.
Yeah, so the Jupiter Venus will be there in November, and it's actually stationing right on your Venus. So you'll probably really feel that through most of November, I would say. I think that could probably bring some opportunity or maybe clearer vision with what you want to do with your career, as well as possibly some healing around what's been going on with your brother. Sometimes I get nervous about being too optimistic about Jupiter transits because sometimes it can just bring more of whatever is already happening. So I would be a little bit cautious about being overly optimistic and just diving into that. But I'd be curious to hear how that plays out for you because there is the potential of career success or vision, as well as healing things with your brother. And Jupiter Venus on its own is a really great signature for love, for finding a partner. I know that's not something that you asked about, but yeah. And July and October, you're going to have your first two passes of Uranus square your sun from your 10th house. Like Sarah was saying, that's another indicator of new perspectives being brought towards what you're doing as far as work goes, how you're seen, and possibly even relocating. Who knows? We did take a peek at your solar return. And Sarah, do you want to talk about that? I can bring it up.
Yeah, it seems like a lot is shifting for you this year. Yeah, we're getting that Uranus transit. We've got that benefic Jupiter hitting your Venus, your career. And so it does look like a fortuitous time to make some changes or to work towards the career that you want. When we looked at relocation, the only feasible relocation we could find would be if it was necessary as part of the work you're doing. When we looked at that, at some point we'll pull up the dial so that you can take a peek at that. But in general, it doesn't seem like a strong time for relocation, with the exception of if your work demands it, then go for it. Then the chart does say that work could be a reason you say goodbye to where you're at right now. And then in the solar return, so this may, in the coming weeks and couple of months, you're going to start to feel into this chart. This is the solar return for this August. And we see that the solar return ascendant is at 17 degrees Taurus, which is in the house of career. And you're going to have this whole next year or solar return year where work is really being highlighted for you. And so it's a really, like I said, it's a really good time to be asking these questions. When we look at the ruler of the ascendant and the solar return, it's Venus at 27 degrees Cancer, and it is sitting right next to your career planet. And again, this is going to get visited by Jupiter. And so definitely that's where we're not surprised you asked the question. That's where a lot of the energy is going this year. And the ruler of the ascendant in the 12th house, this could be a year even where you're doing a lot of the planning, you're seeding things out. You're looking at what steps need to happen before you can really push that out into the world. It's a time to do some of that work within and do some of that work alone. You might need periods of retreat or isolation in order to connect with your own sense of intuition and in order to discern what's really right for you right now. Like Lisa said, it looks like you have some gifts in terms of that. However, those show up for you, however you connect to that still small voice within, find those places this year because I think it will really help guide the work story. You also have Pluto on the midheaven in the solar return. And so this is a year to that's kind of commanding some level of empowerment and you really taking the reins. Again, with Uranus saying it's okay to take a risk. It's okay to shake things up.
Yeah. And I mean, there's so much to say about this solar return chart as well. You have Uranus in the first house, suggesting that you could be making some changes to yourself physically or just changing your environment around you somehow. And it's in a pretty tight square to the sun, which is the ruler of the fourth house in your solar return chart, which states that there's something about where you're living that's changing. And that change, saying it's going to transform your identity somehow and possibly lean into a little bit more empowerment within your career, within your identity. But one thing I wanted to mention as well from a broader strokes is something I always like to throw into timing consultations, which is the secondary progressed lunar phases. And you're currently in what we call the first quarter phase. And so if you think about the moon phases, which just sounds like you know quite a bit about astrology already, but we have the new moon phase and then the first square from the moon to the sun is that first quarter. So you're waxing, you're building, and in 2031, you're going to have your full moon phase. So you still have some work to do. So I like to give people that context because sometimes we want to do everything really quickly. And then we look back on our lives and we're like, oh, yeah, we needed to do all of those other steps before all of these other things came into fruition. And so while, yes, it does look like there's big change for you, that there's ways that you're stepping into your empowerment and focusing on your career and your identity and all of those things, that you're not to the finished point yet. You're still in the process of building something for yourself at this point. 2031 is not that far away, and I have a feeling that you're going to create some beautiful things in this year ahead that's going to put you more onto the path that you really want to be on.
Yeah. On that note, shall we pull up the natal chart again and just take a look at his brother?
Oh, yeah.
So Marcos did mention that his brother has his sun in Scorpio, which I thought was kind of interesting just because all of the angles are fixed in Marcus's chart, which means naturally there's an element of friction with his brother. probably regardless. And then we see that his brother is in the 12th house. And so the sibling story is one that is probably a source of definitely some closely held suffering, something he's been grappling with his whole life. It's not an easy place for planets to be in the 12th house. And like I said earlier, there's already a story about wounding with regard to the men in his life. And this shows up in the family of origin. We see Pluto in the 4th house. And so there could have been some trauma. There could have been some things that happened in the family environment that just made having a healthy, functional relationship with a sibling, maybe that just was not on the table. You do have Mercury Pluto Marcos, and that can speak to sibling stories. And you have Mercury Chiron, my brother is a source of chronic, unremitting pain, a source of wounding. And that Mercury Pluto can also just say something about you, Marcos. And I don't know if there's about either the way you communicate or the way you connect with your brother, you communicate with your brother that looks charged, it looks intense and forceful. And that could be a piece of the dynamic that's working against you.
I agree with Sarah that so much of this brother story seems to be embedded in what was happening in the family overall. It looks whatever occurred in the household was something that was really hard on the both of you and likely created this friction between the two of you. I will say that I'm really happy that Jupiter is coming to help hopefully ease some things. And I think Mars also can represent brothers. Like Mercury can represent children and siblings, but Mars specifically can represent brothers since it's masculine. And
That would be his brother sitting next to ruler of the 8th house. And that brings a source of,
and
can bring a
fear.
source of anxiety, loss, fear.
Mhm.
And we also see Saturn in a quincunx relationship to the brother, to L3. And I don't know, this kind of tells me like, yeah, this relationship is either going to take a ton of work or maybe it's in your best interest just to establish really good boundaries and create some distance. And I'm leaning towards the latter of the two, just because it can be a hard place to have your sibling in the 12th house, can be a chronic source of sorrow, really.
Well, Mars is also in a semi-square to Pluto, which is, yes, which states that, yes, my brother is a source of trauma. And yeah, I definitely, if that's the case, then finding good boundaries. I mean, you're somebody who maybe through hardships has had to learn how to create boundaries and say no. However, the position of the brother from this Venus indicates that the brother showing up as somebody who's working against you behind the scenes, who
Right. The
isn't
hidden enemy.
a hidden enemy, somebody who, because of maybe the psychological connection between the two of you, there could be some part of you that's actually quite close. And you might even feel like there's a past life connection between you or something that feels really close, but also there might be something that you're working through in this lifetime together where the lesson is for both of you. And the bottom line is that your brother is not showing up for you in a way that's supportive of who you are. And that Saturn being in a quincunx, it's hidden blockages. It's not straightforward. So the contention between the two of you is showing up is a way that's blindsiding you. And maybe this Jupiter passing over the Venus can be a time when you can free yourself from whatever illusion has been keeping you guys together and maybe seeing more clearly the real nature of your relationship as brothers.
Sometimes the 12th house, it can be a place where we don't always operate in our best interest. There can be an element of self sabotage to the 12th house. And it's possible that his brother is mirroring some aspect of self.
Hmm.
And so the brother provokes that.
Yeah.
But it's just to reiterate, because astrology is so fascinating, it's just so interesting that Marcos's first top two questions, right? Career and brother are both receiving the transits right now. They're going to have this upcoming Jupiter transit. They both are represented by the same planet in this chart. And so I feel like they're definitely intimately linked. I feel like something about this brother story and the contention with a brother is factoring into the career picture. Whether you need to reconcile or heal the wound with the brother, but to me, it's all very much connected and it's worth exploring those things together. How has your brother impacted you in a way that maybe has affected your ability to show up in the world in the way that you want to? Yeah. So we covered the career, we covered the brother, and we spoke briefly about relocation. So I would love to have a little powwow with Marcos if he wants to reach out to us and
I
check this
know,
out. If he has
seriously.
any input or questions, if he wants to tell us what it is he's doing for work right now, that would be very interesting.
I have more questions than anything. So let's bring up the dial real quick.
A lot of astrologers don't use the dial, and it's a way that we can readily see what we're looking for. So once the dial's up, we can place the pointer on an area of interest, whether we're looking at work, relationship, family, relocation, and we can see what planets come into play. The dial will also bring up the trans-Neptunian planets, which are not everybody's familiar with them, but they do add a level of nuance that's interesting.
They're amazing. All right. Here you go, Marcos. All right. So I think one of the things we really wanted to look at here is Mars is an indicator for work for you. Mars indicates how we put ourselves out into the world, the motivations that we have, the drive that we bring forward. And one of the first things that I noticed is you have this arrow. So here's Mars here, and the arrow landing pretty close to Pluto, Pedo, indicating taking care of people who have wounds, or actually what I thought of was trauma care. And it really correlates with your chart. We have the ruler of your career in the 12th house, and it's opposite Neptune and Uranus. And so it's a similar thing. You're working behind the scenes. And then we also have Mars bringing together in the midpoint of ascendant Chiron, which is stating that the work that you do involves an environment where people are wounded, but also an environment where you're coming forward as a healer. And we see this, you have Chiron natally in your first house, which is also an indication of healing people through the wounds that you've encountered in your own life.
Yeah, and we have Poseidon there as well. And so whatever you pull in, Marcos, in terms of your spirituality, your ideals, your philosophy, your religion, your belief system, that somehow that's intimately connected with your work and the way that you are projecting yourself out into the world.
And Hades is connected here too. It's a bit wide, but I would still pull it in because it's a little over a degree from a big dot. And that verbiage around that is isolation or secret doctrine, which again brings us back into that 12th house of what's on the other side of the veil and who are you helping there and how are you helping them. And then Uranus Neptune is also pulled into this picture, your Mars picture as well, which we already have that as part of your work picture. But Uranus Neptune is strongly psychic abilities, spiritual depth, and journeys into the unknown. It's a very active spiritual landscape, Uranus Neptune is. And having that aligned with your work is pretty powerful.
There are just so many ways this can actually manifest in a concrete way. But if you have not explored mediumship,
Yeah, seriously.
it would be very interesting to do so because even the Mercury Pluto, and then here in this picture, We see the Pluto Cupido and Mercury's there within orb of the arrow as well. And I just think about him as the spokesperson, the voice for healing trauma, for being around, for creating support groups, families, connections based on doing that deep healing work and pulling in his own belief system to support that.
Absolutely. Yeah. One thing I would say about figuring out what your career is really delving into what your spiritual landscape looks like. No matter which way we look at your career, the spiritual, like for you, is really important. And it's really front and center. And we see it just by looking at this Mars in two or three different ways. And maybe that's part of doing the muggle work on the front end, right? Because digging into your spiritual beliefs isn't something that pays us money necessarily all the time. So maybe that seems to be something that's really needs to go hand in hand as part of whatever career you're delving into.
Yeah, because there's something that just looks so service oriented too, in terms of just
Absolutely.
offering up a real service. And yeah, not necessarily trying to attach a dollar sign to that right away,
Yes.
but as part of your great work of healing.
Hmm. Yeah, there's so many signatures, not only on the dial, but also in the chart about you having to surrender yourself in this lifetime, like having to go through some sort of loss or surrender. And that's also tied in with the career path as well. Look at
Because that money
money.
is in the first house of identity and it's very important to you. Obviously, it's something that is important to you and you're thinking about it. And yet the thrust of the chart is really does say something about service and some level of sacrifice and making sure that your work really aligns with that you are seen, that this history of yours, this person that you've become as a result of your early experience is pushed out into the world through whatever you're doing. It's connecting with people, it's healing, but that really needs to be the priority and the money needs to be kind of a separate issue. And if you've been trying to make the two meet, that might be why you're at this place in life at 32 years old saying, "Oh, but I haven't done the thing. I haven't built the thing." And I would start with connecting with your own sense of discernment and figuring out the thing very much needs to be bringing some of who and what you are out there and taking some risks in that regard
Hmm.
to push towards that ideal.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess we can just speak very quickly to the money here because I think that it really corroborates with what we've been saying. So Jupiter can be seen as the for money, for wealth, and it is exactly aligned to your Chiron, which is stating that money for you is something that brings up wounding, which we kind of spoke to when I was talking about the second house too. That you have a very complicated task in this lifetime. And that's what Sarah was talking about, your story needing to come forward and needing to be seen. And I get the sense when I'm looking at this chart and digging deeper into it that you are here to heal people through your story. This is really like why you're here. I know our MC, our career doesn't always illustrate how we're going to make money necessarily, but it does illustrate what our legacy is in the world and what our purpose is in the world and how people will see us, how they'll remember us. And I'm not saying that as you go down this path, you're not going to make money. But it's actually interesting because it looks like as you go down this path as and you work as a healer, that could be your path to making money. However, first you have to work through the part of where it's your greatest wound, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think, again, when we talk about specific things like healing work, I mean, that show up in a lot of different iterations. So because I pull
Money.
this in, I see a story of like there could have been poverty in the family. There could have been a father who had to work himself to the quick, you
Yeah.
know? And so there's that part of you that might be doing some work around changing the family story. You're a belief system that came up in the landscape of some level of scarcity, you
Mhm.
know, Pluto Cupido. My family
Yeah.
did not have the resources they needed. And so I feel some level of sympathy towards how pressing this could feel for this man to figure it out.
Mhm.
If that's really the case with his father, some of that wounding was like dad wasn't available because he had to work all the time.
Yes. Yeah, it does look like dad was working really hard, and that was an example for you that might make it hard now to step into being an adult generating wealth.
And taking risk, right? It might be harder for him to take those risks that are
Yeah.
necessary because, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. But you were born for this, and I really thank you, Marcos, for sending all of this information, for giving us these questions. As far as moving, I don't know that we have enough time to really get into that too much right now, but I think we covered the other two, definitely the career, pretty thoroughly. So I hope that helps you out and gives you some idea of how to move forward. And of course, we're always here for consultations and that sort of thing. And just so grateful to you for being vulnerable and letting us do this work
Yes,
on the
thank you
large.
so much.
Yes.
And the call is still out there if you have questions. We'll be doing another one of these again very soon, but don't hesitate to email, send a line, let us know what you want to learn about, what techniques, what you're experiencing in your own life, and we're happy to dive in.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
See you
you.
next
Be
time.
well.